Chairman of the Board of KenGen, Mheshimiwa Goy Masadia, board members, Chief Executive Officer, Engineer Peter Njenga, senior staff of KenGen, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. My name is Nzioka Waita. A family friend to KenGen. For many years, a former public servant and a lover of development. So I feel quite at home in this audience and very honored to have been invited to share a few thoughts on the subject. I work for an institution called the Tony Blair Institute. Many people think we do charity work, but we are a very interesting organization. We work only with heads of state, and we do primarily the work of getting things done in a number of sectors. Energy, public finance management, infrastructure, AI and digitalization of government, and basically a lot of center of government activities. I oversee the operations in Africa, which cover 17 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So today I'm here to share a few thoughts on the investment climate with respect to KenGen's aspirations. I think a lot has already been covered that talks about what has been done and talks about Kenya. But for where KenGen is going, Kenya is actually too small. And that is the thing we sort of need to accept. Universal access will be achieved probably under this administration. And at that point, retail distribution of power will no longer be something you'd be interested in because you would do it with your eyes closed. So let's talk about what the world looks like. I saw there was a challenge about 1,500 megawatts, and the PS has ramped up that number to 2,200. So you're well on the way to the Vision 20 aspiration of getting us to 5K at the right time. But the question that begs is, where will all this power go? And Chairman, we had a very interactive session this morning about the ambitions, you know, the really big ambitions. Forget this 5,000. It's what can you do with mini nuclear reactor type kind of power. But having said that, there are some things that work in favor of continued investment in the renewable sector. One is cost. So recently you have Egypt bringing on stream Komombo solar plant at 2.25 cents per kilowatt hour in terms of generation cost. And this is a solar plant financed privately, but primarily with money raised from the Middle East, severely de-risked and made quite available. And 560 megawatt project that has just come on stream. You then have new opportunities that make sustainable power very attractive, particularly the energy mix that Kenya has. And this is the carbon border adjustment mechanism enforced by the European Union. Now, what does this mean? In the European Union, any imports destined for Europe that have any carbon elements in their production cost are penalized. A simple example would be like aluminium. 1 ton of aluminium produced in clean power, clean sustainable power, will cost $3,000 per ton. The same ton made using fossil fuels will attract a penalty of $600. So straight away, there is an incentive for large-scale manufacturers to use sustainable renewables. You don't really need to convince them. One of the challenges that the world is facing today is that the demand, the supply chains post-COVID have been so complicated to try and get them back on track that power is being exchanged left and right. In Europe, one of the biggest problems they have is the war in Ukraine removed LNG from circulation. So all the LNG coming from Russia into Europe was no longer available as it was. So LNG all over the world has been mopped up by 3 or 4 countries in Europe. So today, if you went to tender for LNG, you'll find that you struggle to get your hands on it. But be that as it may, the incentives for fossil fuels, particularly coal, has now completely vanished. So you have countries like China, which are 60% coal-powered. They have said they are no longer financing any new plants that are fossil fuel-powered. What does that mean? For manufacturers on the continent that are relying heavily on coal-powered plants, particularly in the Southern Africa power pool, they are looking desperately for sustainable renewables to get into their grid so that they can export into Europe. The only place that LNG remains popular, or fossil fuels remains popular, is appendages to the US economy. As you know, America continues to finance fossil fuels, and it is their policy even now to construct new LNG plants, including in Sierra Leone, where one import facility has just come on stream. However, that is more the exception than the rule. Something else looking at is just the decoupling. Being able to say that Kenya can comfortably say that its energy mix is largely renewable already puts it on the global radar. And people have taken an interest in wanting to get power from our market. And this is where we now turn to the headwinds. What is the reality of our power? As we speak today, Kenya brings in 400 megawatts from Ethiopia. We have power exchange agreements with our neighbors in Uganda. We have exchange agreements with our neighbors in Tanzania. And largely, we are operating at peak, but below installed capacity. So if you add another 2,200 megawatts in very near term, what we need to be asking ourselves is what is the market opportunity that lies ahead? And what are the challenges that would prevent investment from taking place quickly? So, very quickly. It was mentioned here briefly, but it's always important to state that the last mile is critical. Having a solvent last mile provider is mission critical. In Africa, only 2 of the power utilities are financially solvent. All of them are relying on government subsidy and government backup, including Kenya. And it's something to be concerned about as a power generator, because as a power generator, your key issue is offtake, guaranteed offtake, and that you'll be paid good money for the power that you generate. That is a challenge. This affects bankability of projects. So when you're around shopping for money, the first question your financiers will ask you is, can you please unbundle for us the offtake arrangements? Can we see who is paying this money, at what cost, and how liquid they are, and what is their capability of paying you on time? Second issue, power trading. Electricity is a movable item. It can move from here to South Africa. It can move from here to Egypt. It can move from here to Mauritania. All it needs is supporting infrastructure to make that happen, supporting policies and security of payments. Power trading is not new. The East Africa power pool, unfortunately, of the major power pools, is the least performing power pool. Today, the most optimally structured power pool is the South African power pool. followed by West African Power Pool, and then East African Power Pool. And in East Africa, we're in a fairly unique situation. If you look at this map, you have Ethiopia. His Excellency, the President, was there the other day looking at the Renaissance Dam. You have 5,000 megawatts plus another 1,350. They have 6,300 megawatts. They do not have even a fraction of that going into consumption. The idle capacity is so high, the people queuing there are Bitcoin providers who are also knocking on the door here in Kenya. And Bitcoin providers are like matatus. They come and go and leave very little in the economy where they are. You have Kenya, 2.5 gig and above. You have Uganda that already is in energy surplus with Karuma, with Bujagali, and with their interests in the region. You have Tanzania that is slowly making its way on a mix of power taken from Kenya and transited through from Ethiopia. So you see the whole eastern seaboard is power secure at the moment. So where does the demand sit? The demand sits central going south. The demand is in eastern DRC, Zambia, and going down into Malawi, Mozambique, South Africa, Botswana, Angola, and of course the jewel in the crown, which is in Pretoria. That is where everybody wants to be. What are the obstacles for that? Now, Kenya, you know, is not a member of SADC. There are political implications for us looking south, but there are very pragmatic motivations as to why Kenya should consider becoming a member of the Southern Africa Power Pool, because they pay more money, they operate escrow arrangements. When you supply money into that power pool, you are assured you get your cash out. The demand far outstrips the current supply of generation in the Southern Africa region. Today, South Africa, which has a demand of 40 gigawatts of power, only is able to produce about 32. The delta comes from Mozambique, Mpanda Ngua in Mozambique. It comes from Kariba Dam. We all know the drought that devastated Zambia and Zimbabwe. The Kariba Dam is operating suboptimally. They are able to pick a little bit of fossil fuel power from Botswana at crazy tariffs. Even Botswana itself is load shedding in order to sell power to its neighbor. So the power situation down south is a huge opportunity staring us in the face. You have countries like Angola that today generate 6,300 megawatts. They are only using 3,000. But Angola is in a very unique situation because of its Portuguese background. They are not so integrated with their neighbors. So they have a lot of idle capacity that they are unable to push across into Southern Africa. So what are they doing with it? A little bit of it is going to Southern Congo, into Lubumbashi, into the Copper Belt. Very little. So it still leaves opportunity for power. And even if that entire 3,000 megawatts from Angola was to go into that power pool, it would still leave a gap of about 5. And a big opportunity for countries like Kenya and our neighbors to the north. But there are a number of things that really mitigate against this. Another opportunity staring Kenya in the face is Eastern Congo. And we are just one step away from Eastern Congo. But that one step is politically loaded and geopolitically complex. Because for you to transit power into Kivu or into Goma, you must pass through Rwanda, you must pass through Uganda. Uganda and Rwanda already have their own power arrangements which they would like to profit from. So Uganda, of course, you know, has Bujagali, Karuma, Jinja, which they are taking power across. Rwanda is now one of the investors in the IPS-driven project, Ruzizi 3. And Ruzizi 3 is designed primarily to support investment in Eastern Congo. So where does that leave Kenya? It means that we cannot go east. However, there is a very clear transport corridor to the south through Tanzania, TANESCO, and into Zambia. And if we are able to deal with the politics of that, we have ready customers in the copper belt in Zambia. And this should drive some of the investment opportunities and the investment decisions that those looking to invest in Kenya's renewable opportunities can cash in on. But it's easier said than done. Money is expensive, depending on who you borrow it from. If you are able to get into innovative financing models or look beyond traditional partners, Kenya has traditionally been looking at multilateral institutions and DFIs that are European. We've been looking east for a lot of our infrastructure debt, but the model of financing needed to get competitive power below 16 cents per kilowatt hour requires to be different. In my estimation, that kind of money can only be found in the Middle East. So Kenya has some relationships to build. KenGen, as an independent entity or quasi-independent entity, has some brothers to make across the Red Sea who can possibly help us to get to this point. There are many ways that we can take ourselves to scale and get investment into clean power. One is, and I was really pleased to hear that the investment park that KenGen is setting up already has potential contracts almost coming to 600 or 700 megawatts of demand that have been driven. But remember, you are not alone. I told you less than 50 kilometers from here, there are SEZs, all of them looking at wellhead generation, all of them politically anchored, all of them financed and liquid. So you will be competing for some of these opportunities. But be that as it may, Kenya remains still small for you, given that you are the big boy in the field. Your opportunities should be influencing Kenya's participation in the power pools, influencing the trajectory of your key customer, Kenya Power and Lighting, and then also influencing policy that would encourage more investment in data centers. So it's good to hear that Google is coming through. As you know, government of Kenya signed an MOU with the Emiratis about G42, which is a Microsoft and Oracle consortium supposedly designing a tier 3 data center that should consume well over 150 megawatts. That is also an opportunity for you. And also what our EV strategy is as a nation. There is a bigger picture around minerals and beneficiation of minerals and the amount of power needed to go into the refining space and the opportunities that are there for large-scale power producers. In other contexts, I think I've made the case for Southern Africa as if I live there, but the mathematics is so simple. They need 6 gigawatts of power. They pay 16 cents per kilowatt hour. What is standing between us and a payday is some politics. And politics can always be resolved when commercial interests are clarified with a lot of clarity. Kenya needs forex. Kenya needs to de-risk its own generation, because the more generation you generate, the more power you generate and capture in your own country, actually the more expensive power becomes for the consumer. And we all know how power is an emotive issue. It is the one thing that can make or break the economy. For Kenya to get to a place where we are looking at 16, 17 US dollar cents as retail tariff to consumer or industrial tariff to consumer, we need to think about things differently. One of which is tariffing. Kenya Power should really be encouraged to look at off-peak tariffs. Off-peak tariffs. What happens to geothermal that is being generated between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m.? When all the factories are closing at 6 p.m., geothermal is still powering through. That steam is still powering through. Yet, manufacturers have closed, laborers have gone home. Those factories should be opening at 6 p.m. They should be given a tariff that makes sense for them to consume. Our clinker people, our iron ore, our smelting, our steel people, all of them should be encouraged to run off-peak so that we are able to push all this power into those industries based on what we have today, and encourage new people to come in and set up. A lot of that depends on the macro economics. I always wish to remind that we don't live in a vacuum. So even as we generate power, we are not the only ones generating power as a country. Our neighbors are extremely driven because we have taken power as a national, we have securitized power. We want to be power secure as countries. We want to be independent and control our own power. But commercially, that is not realistic. As sentimental as you'd want to be about your power, it is not economically viable for you to want to control all of it. The best thing to do is let it flow like water. Because if the Ethiopians have 6,350 megawatts, they will do all the politics they can to make sure that they can sell that power into Kenya. What does that mean for Kenyan? Now, as we generate our power, the question marks happen. What is the cost of transmission? What are the wheeling tariffs? So if Ketraco is inefficient in the way it builds its network of very expensive transmission lines, automatically your business case starts to collapse, because you're saying if you want to get to SA and you're targeting that 16 cents, and that 16 cents, it should include your profit, a very healthy profit for Kenyan. It means that all your dependencies, particularly your transmission lines, need to give open and transparent costs on their wheeling. That becomes more complex when you have PPP arrangements for transmission, because those wheeling costs are not immediately visible to power generators like yourselves. Second is the policies. We have challenges with our neighbors in terms of how we view economic development. But the reality is it is both in Kenya and Tanzania's interest to open up the flow of power and to allow power to move in whatever direction it needs to move, so that everybody makes money on either side of the border. That requires a reinvestment in our engagement within the EAC and a reimagining of our regional power pool. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to bore you with the geopolitics of power, but unfortunately the geopolitics defines the reality in which you will operate and the money that you put into your bank accounts. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Waita. Nzioka, for setting out the vision so clearly. I have a feeling there might be a request for right reply a bit later on, but I'm going to ask you to have a seat by all means, and I hope you're staying around because I think there are going to be some questions for you definitely coming up. So thank you once again.
Thank you. As I said, I'm a family member. I'm not in a hurry to go anywhere.
Good. Fantastic. We look forward to having a bit more conversations with you. Now, no, you can sit down. Sorry, you're not going to be joining our panel?
Where do you?
Down where you were, sorry. You know I sound so rude, like go back to where you came from.